My name is Aloan Bennett, and I am 34 years old. This morning, I had my daughter Martha's soft little head resting against my shoulder, one hand holding her bottle, the other clutching a piece of toast that had long gone cold, right there in my own kitchen when my mother walked in. She didn't even glance at the 3-week-old baby in my arms. "Pack your things," she said, in the same tone you'd use to dismiss a hotel cleaner. "Callum and Jenna need this house. They're squeezed into that cramped flat with the twins like sardines. You're on your own. With a little girl, a one-bedroom rental will do you just fine." I opened my mouth. She raised a hand to cut me off, as if swatting away a fly. "Don't you dare bring up that property deed, Aloan. Talking about legal papers in a family, how embarrassing. You're always the most sensible child. What happened to you?" She turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the oak floor I had laid with my own hands, one step, two, like a countdown. 3 weeks earlier, on the night Martha came early, the delivery room was bitterly cold. I gripped Maisie's hand so hard I left bruises on her knuckles. When the nurse pressed that 6-pound bundle of warm flesh against my chest, my very first thought was, count her breaths. 1, 2, 3, a 2-second pause, 4. That is the curse the neonatal intensive care unit has taught me. You count the breaths of everyone you love until it frays your nerves. I had been an intensive care nurse for 12 years. I had held premature babies no bigger than my palm as they turned from purple to pink in my hands. I had watched families collapse in the corridor while doctors shouted, "One more round." I had never once panicked. But that night, when Martha let out her first cry, I sobbed harder than she did. Because in that instant I realized that the only person in this world who truly welcomed her arrival was Maisie. Everyone else's phone was either switched off, or when my mother finally answered, her first words were, "A girl? Oh well, Callum's wife had twin boys, you know." You see, in the Bennett family, being sensible is my original sin, and being capable is my destiny. I paid the deposit for Callum's wedding. He paid me back for 3 years, until I finally told him to forget it. I covered our father's funeral expenses because my mother said, "Your brother just bought a new car. Money is tight." Then my mother moved in 2 years ago. She said it would be a few months transition, and until yesterday her dressing table still occupied a third of my walk-in wardrobe. But here is the thing, once upon a time, I gave all of that willingly. 6 years ago, at 28, I scraped together the down payment for this 3-bedroom cottage on Hawthorne Lane by working every single Christmas shift for 6 straight years, claiming every holiday bonus, and saving every bus ticket stub from the 3 a.m. rides home. On the afternoon I signed the contract, my right hand shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. The first night I moved in, the house was completely empty, not even a mattress. I lay down on the bare living room floor, my back against the cold wood, staring up at a cobweb on the ceiling, and suddenly I laughed. It was the first time in my life I felt that a roof was entirely mine, not borrowed, not the eldest daughter's duty, but Aloan Bennett's own. The next morning, my neighbor, 70-year-old Mrs. Hale, brought over a loaf of soda bread. She said something I took as a joke then, but which now makes my blood run cold. She said, "Girl, any woman who buys a house on her own will eventually learn one thing. You haven't bought bricks and mortar. You've bought an invisible wall between you and everyone else. On this side is you. On that side is there you have it, so you should give it entitlement." I didn't understand. Or rather, I didn't want to understand. After my mother moved in, the changes were subtle, slow, as silent as drowning. She started saying, "Our living room, our crooked oak tree," and on the phone to her church friends, "Our house has such a nice layout." The first time I corrected her, she waved her hand and laughed. "Oh, you and your mother. What's mine is yours." The second time, right in front of Callum, she glanced at me and said to Aunt Edna on the phone, "Aloan has gone daft from nursing, always fussing about paperwork. Who in a family would fight her over a house?" Honestly, everyone laughed. I laughed too. My mouth ached from the effort. The turning point came on the Saturday of Martha's full-month mark. I came home from the hospital with the baby and found the nursery door open. The entire wall, The starry wallpaper I had spent 3 nights painting by hand had been scraped off. In its place hung an enormous family portrait. My father, my mother, Callum, Jenna, and the twin boys. Not me. Not Martha. I stood in the doorway. The bottle slipped from my hand and hit the carpet with a dull thud. My mother poked her head out of the kitchen, holding a cup of tea, her tone as casual as if she were rearranging furniture. "I'm turning this room into a playroom for the twins. They're moving in a couple of weeks. Your stars were pretty enough, but I had a workman take them down. Too childish, boys wouldn't like them." I turned around. Martha was still fast asleep in my arms. I walked to the intercom and pressed the button that dialed my mother's mobile number. I said only one sentence. "Mom, who did you just say is moving in?" There was 3 seconds of silence on the line. Then the sound of a phone dropping, smashing against the paving stones at my front door, as crisp as the crack of a bone. I opened the door. My mother stood at the bottom of the steps, her phone shattered at her feet. She looked up at me, and for a split second her face held an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not embarrassment, but fear. As if she had just realized that the woman holding the baby in front of her was no longer the hand that could be passed any plate. Behind me, scraps of torn-off star wallpaper still floated in the air of the nursery. Martha stirred in my arms, her tiny fist closing around one of my fingers. I looked down at her chin, that stubborn little curve that was exactly like her grandmother's, and I remembered what Maisie had said to me in the hospital break room. She said, "Eloan, all your life you've been buying a seat at that family table. But what you bought was never a seat. It was a spot beside the table, where you hand them plates, pour their wine, clear their leftovers. You never get to sit down." I lifted my head and looked at my mother. I saw her lips moving, probably readying another family or sensible speech. I saved her the breath. "Mom," I said, my voice not loud but each word hammering down like a nail. "The deed has my name on it. The mortgage is mine. The bank account is mine. That paving stone you're standing on, I paid for one of those with the overtime I earned at 20, kneeling on that hospital floor for 40 minutes doing CPR on a septic baby. Do you want me to count them out for you? Brick by brick?" She said nothing. The wind blew the stray hairs across her forehead, and I suddenly saw how old she had become. But that age no longer softened me. "The twins' playroom," I said, glancing down at the sleeping Martha, "belongs in Callum's own house. If he doesn't have one, that's his problem. My daughter is not going to grow up under a starless wall, staring at a family photo that doesn't include her." I closed the door. The click of the lock was as clear as a cry, and as final. The echo of that lock lingered in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then the world went quiet. I slid down against the door and sat on the floor, Martha shifting in my arms, her tiny breath warm and milky against my collarbone. It struck me then. This was the first thing I had ever done in the Bennett family that was not expected of me. I had said no. Eloan Bennett, the one who always nodded, always handed plates, always took the Christmas shifts, had just shut her own mother out. From downstairs I could hear my mother's footsteps pacing the pavement. 2 turns, then nothing. She didn't knock. She didn't ring the bell. And that made me even more nervous because she knew me too well. She knew that if she knocked now, I would soften. She was waiting. I waited 20 minutes, then laid Martha in her cot. The torn wallpaper still hung on the wall, its jagged edges like the bite marks of some animal. I picked up the scattered paper scraps from the carpet, folded them carefully, and tucked them into the bottom drawer of the bedside table. Some things need to be kept, even in pieces. After dark, I heard Mrs. Hale's footsteps next door. She always went out to the back garden at 9 to bring in the washing line. Her steps paused on the path along my wall, then stopped. She knocked on my back door. "Girl," said 70-year-old Mrs. Hale, standing outside with a bowl of steaming soup, her gray curls ruffled by the night wind. She peered inside. "Your mother is sitting on your front step." She brought a folding chair. I flinched, the bowl warming my hands. "How long?" "Half an hour." She carried the chair out from her own place and parked it right in the middle of your front doormat. Every neighbor passing by has seen her. Mrs. Hale pressed her lips together. Her eyes, which had seen half a century of human drama, held no pity, only a kind of brutal clarity. If you open that door tonight, she will never move out of this house. Martha made a small sound from the bedroom. I glanced back at the baby monitor screen. Her little fist was gripping the edge of her blanket. The way she slept always reminded me of those brave little lives in the NICU, so fragile, yet breathing with all their might. Mrs. Hale followed my gaze, then lowered her voice. "Do you have milk in the house? I'll bring you 2 slices of bread." "No, Mrs. Hale. I'm not offering them to you." She turned and walked back towards her own house, her silhouette swaying under the streetlight. "I'm offering them to that little one. She needs a clear-headed adult to look after her. You're not clear-headed right now." She was right. I was not. I sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the oven, and drank Mrs. Hale's soup mouthful by mouthful. Tomato broth with basil, warm and fragrant. I tried to remember the last time I had eaten a proper meal, 3 days ago. Maybe? Martha had been colicky all night. I had walked 3,000 steps around the living room with her in my arms, peeling and eating an orange one-handed. Did that count as a meal? My phone lit up 3 times on the coffee table. Callum. 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 I didn't answer. The 4th time it was Jenna, my sister-in-law, a woman I had never quite learned to hate. She had married Callum at 23, her voice soft as waterlogged cotton, shapeless and gentle. Her text read, "Alone, Mum is staying with us tonight. She said you kicked her out." Followed by a crying emoji. I stared at that little yellow face with its 2 cartoon tears for a long time. It was a world away from the way my mother had stood on my doorstep this afternoon. My mother never cries. She only informs you of your mistakes in a way that suffocates you with guilt. I replied. She chose to leave. "I'll be home tomorrow during the day." Jenna answered instantly. "Callum has work tomorrow." "That's fine." I typed, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted. Finally, I sent 2 words. "Good night." That wasn't the old me. The old me would have said, "How about the weekend?" Or "I can swap shifts," or "Tell him not to worry." But Martha was 3 weeks old and had not once seen her uncle. Not once. Callum had been too busy to even drop by and look at his niece, yet after one phone call from my mother, the whole family had held an emergency meeting about how to relocate me from my own house. When I stood up, my knees cracked. 34 years old, 12 years of nursing, I had worn down my joints by perhaps a decade, more than most. Bend, lift, lower, bend, lift, lower, that motion, repeated tens of thousands of times. The smallest baby in the NICU had weighed 500 grams, its skin translucent blue, as thin as cling film. You had to be so gentle with your palms, afraid that one breath might blow that fragile life away. I had seen too many little bodies that couldn't hold on, and I had seen miracles too. I had seen a 600-gram preemie, after 4 months in an incubator, whose mother fell to her knees crying on discharge day. And I had seen a full-term, healthy baby boy whose mother's postpartum depression went unnoticed, left alone in an empty bath for 3 minutes, and that was it. I don't know at what moment I became this person, the alone who no longer trembles, no longer hesitates, who knows where the line is and where she can bend. Perhaps it was the night Martha was born. Perhaps earlier, on countless 3 a.m. shifts, intubating those tiny, struggling lungs. My colleagues often say that the NICU is a place where panic becomes a luxury you cannot afford. You can't afford it because your hands must stay steady. I went to the front door and peered through the peephole. My mother was still there, sitting squarely on the doormat in that folding chair, wrapped in Callum's old puffer jacket, her silhouette hunched under the porch light, like a lone, stranded old bird. My hand touched the doorknob. I pressed down a millimeter. Then I let go. I went back to the bedroom, lifted Martha from her cot, and held her against me as I lay down on the double bed. In her sleep, she had her father's chin, that man I had decided not to speak of again, his features reduced to that tiny curve on her face, like a crease that could never be smoothed out. I hummed a lullaby we all sang at the nurse's station, hopelessly off-key, but she didn't mind. Her little hand gripped the collar of my nightgown, just as tightly as she had once gripped the umbilical cord inside me. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow would be a battle. But tonight, my daughter breathed in my arms. 1, 2, 3, for a 2-second pause, 5, 6. I used to count the breaths of my patients. Now I count hers. That is the fate of a mother. You love someone so much you are afraid to blink. I woke to Martha's cry, and with it, the sound of something plastic scraping against the front path. I ran barefoot to the peephole. My mother was gone. The folding chair had been folded away. The step was swept clean. The dead leaves had been gathered into a neat pile in the corner, her signature habit. My mother has an obsession. Every morning she must sweep the fallen leaves from the doorstep, whether they are in anyone's way or not. I changed Martha's nappy, fed her, and placed her in the bouncer in the living room. She stared, transfixed, at the ceiling light, a second-hand brass fixture I had found at a salvage warehouse, with one crooked lampshade. At 3 weeks, babies can't see clearly yet, but she loves light, loves movement. That she got from me. I also love things that move, that live, that can still be saved. At 8:17 a.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, moved Martha's bouncer towards the kitchen so that whatever happened at the door wouldn't startle her, and opened it. Callum stood outside. He wore his gray builder's jacket, his hard hat strap still hanging around his neck, as if he had come straight from a site. He was half a head shorter than me, but broad-shouldered, looking from behind like a round, solid cupboard. His face was the one that had always made it impossible to truly stay angry at him. Round eyes, a flat nose, a smile like a friendly golden retriever. But he wasn't smiling now. "Alone," he said, his voice low, like a man holding back in public. "Mum sat on your doorstep all night. You know that." I knew. Of course I knew. "You didn't answer my calls last night," he added. I stepped aside to let him in. He hesitated, and when he crossed the threshold, he lifted his feet as if testing whether the floor might cave in. That gesture made my heart pinch. He still remembered that this was his sister's house, and that he had to tread lightly. But that pinch was quickly smothered by something else, a hot, rising thing from my stomach. I remembered that 3 weeks ago, while I was lying on the delivery bed biting through a towel in pain, the nurses had called his phone 3 times. He hadn't answered. Later, Jenna explained that Callum was on a tight deadline. "Callum," I said, letting his name rest on my tongue for a second. "Come with me." He followed me to the nursery door. I pushed it open. The starry wall was now only half there. The side near the window still held the deep blue base and golden stars. The side near the door had been gouged and scraped, exposing the dull gray plaster beneath. The pungent smell of leftover paint thinner still hung in the air. I had left the window open all night to air it out, but it hadn't fully cleared. Callum's face, from the base of his neck upward, turned red. "I didn't know he started." "Didn't know what?" I turned to face him. I was taller, and looking down, I could see the thinning patch on the crown of his head. "Didn't know she was turning this room into a playroom for your twins? Or didn't know she planned to move me out and give you the entire house?" His lips moved. The word "I didn't know" stuck in his throat like a fishbone. "Yesterday afternoon when she called me," I said, my voice flat as a monitor's flatline, "you were right beside her. I heard your voice. You said, 'If Aloan doesn't agree, we'll manage.'" "Yes, you said that, and she replied, 'She will agree, just wait.'" "You didn't argue with her then?" Callum's ears were now crimson. He looked everywhere but at me, at the torn wallpaper, at the floor, at the window. "Aloan, that was Mum's decision, not." "How old are you, Callum?" 32. A 32-year-old man, with someone trying to push his sister out of her own house, and you just wait? He fell silent. The nursery was perfectly quiet, save for the occasional agu from Martha down the hall, that newborn curiosity, discovering her own voice. Callum finally brought his gaze back to me. In those round eyes that had always made everyone forgive him, a sheen of water suddenly appeared. "Aloan," he said, his voice breaking into something younger, the little boy who used to come to my room in the middle of the night, standing by my bed with his lip trembling after a bad dream. "I didn't come to speak for Mum. I came to tell you. Jenna and I talked. We're not moving in. We'll rent the new flat, whatever it costs. You don't have to move. Something in my chest loosened by half an inch. But Mum, he started again, and I knew immediately what was coming. I could recite it by heart. The Bennett family's magic spell. She's not well lately, and since Dad died, she's been so unstable. Could you just give in this once, please? Just this once. Just this once. Just this once. I heard myself let out a laugh, soft, thin, a huff through my nose. Callum's shoulders shrank. Callum, you are 32, with a wife and twin sons, living in a 900-pound-a-month flat, driving a brand new car. I've taken the bus to work for 12 years. Your mother sat on my doorstep all night without once asking how Martha is doing. She's 3 weeks old, and you, her uncle, are here for the first time today. Do you know how much she weighs now? Do you know her jaundice levels have dropped to normal? Do you know she needs to be walked for 3 hours at night because of colic? The watery sheen in Callum's eyes froze. It was as if he had just realized that a new life had joined this family. Or maybe he had known all along, but that new life was a girl, his sister's child, not Bennett blood. Go and look at her, I said, stepping aside to show him the pink bundle and the bouncer at the end of the hall. Just one look, then you can leave. I don't need you to persuade me to give way. I need you to remember that you have a niece, and her name is Martha, and she will not grow up in someone else's playroom. She will grow up in her own home. Callum's feet were nailed to the floor. He glanced towards the bouncer. From that angle, all he could see were Martha's 2 little feet kicking in the air, wearing yellow socks. His Adam's apple bobbed. Doesn't she cry? She cried for 3 hours. I just settled her. If you go in now, she'll probably wake up again. Then I won't go in. He stepped back, his shoulder knocking against the doorframe with a dull thump. He rubbed the spot, turned back to me, his lips moving, and finally squeezed out, "Alone. I'm sorry." Those 3 words were lighter than I had ever imagined. Light, as if drifting from very far away, with a delay. I had waited for them for years, had heard, "Alone, you're so sensible. Alone, help us out. Alone, you're a star," but "I'm sorry" had never come. Until this year, when he was 32. I looked into his eyes, those round, golden retriever eyes. He really was a good man. Just too casually good. Good without effort. Good out of habit. "Don't apologize for her," I said. "For your own part, I've heard it. I accept it. Now go." He left. The hem of his work jacket brushed against the hallway wall, dislodging a small flake of dried paint. I heard his footsteps on the front path, then the sound of his new car starting up. The engine revved for 2 seconds and then went quiet. From the kitchen window, I watched him sit in the driver's seat, both hands on the steering wheel, his forehead resting on his hands, his shoulders heaving. He was crying. I looked away. Martha had woken in the bouncer, letting out a loud awe and then demanding attention. I walked over and lifted her. Her tiny fingers closed around my collar, her little chin wrinkling. I thought of the pile of leaves my mother had swept this morning, neatly stacked at the corner of the wall. She had swept them with a certain certainty, certain that I would eventually open the door, eventually relent, eventually put everything back the way it had been for 34 years. But last night, after that lock clicked, something had changed forever. At 10 o'clock, I put Martha in the baby carrier and walked to the corner cafe to buy milk. The owner, Susan, who had known me for 6 years, saw the little head peeking out of the carrier, and her eyes went wide. "Good Lord, Eloan. You had a baby? 3 weeks ago." And the father? Not around. She was a grown-up. She knew what to ask and what not to. She made my latte with double foam and drew a little smiley face on the lid. "On the house. You look like you've lost 10 pounds since 3 weeks ago. Drink up." I carried my coffee home. Passing the crooked old oak tree on the corner, I noticed a new metal post hammered into the ground beside its roots, probably for someone's bicycle. 6 years ago, on the afternoon I signed the purchase contract, that same tree had stood there just as twisted and tangled as a ball of unraveled yarn. I had stood right here and looked at it for a long time, thinking, it doesn't matter if the house is crooked, If the porch is sunk, as long as it's mine. As long as it belongs to me. Back then, I hadn't even known what I wanted from it. Now I understand. I wanted a place where no one would ever order me to pack my bags. A place where no one could use the word family to pry open my foundations. A place where I could sit on the windowsill with my daughter, thinking of nothing, just watching her suck her fingers. When I got home, Mrs. Hale was trimming her roses in the front garden. She saw me, put down her shears, came over, and handed me a small bag of freshly picked mint through the fence. Steep this in hot water. Good for milk supply. Mrs. Hale, I said, taking the bag. How long have you known my mother? She thought for a moment. The day after you moved in, she came to help you unpack. I was in my back garden, and I overheard her on the phone. That child insists on buying her own house, all alone, poor thing. That's when I knew this old lady had pinned the word poor on you. A mother giving her daughter poor. That's more dangerous than anything. I looked down at the mint leaves in the bag, green, with slightly wilted edges. I sent my brother away this morning, too. Good thing, said Mrs. Hale, patting a splinter on the fence. You had 3 choices today. Open the door for your mother, keep it closed, or tear the whole thing down and rebuild it. You chose the hardest but the rightest path. Aloan, that wallpaper, I'll help you repaint it. I spent 2 years at art school when I was young. I blinked. You art school? Can't you tell? She laughed, her eyes curving into crescent moons, wrinkles gathering at the corners. I painted watercolors for 2 years. Then I got married, had a child, got divorced, and never picked up a brush again. But I can still paint a few stars. That half-torn wall of yours, it breaks my heart. We agreed to start tomorrow afternoon. As I carried Martha and the mint leaves back home, I felt the light on Hawthorne Lane brighten a little. Sunlight streamed through the crooked oak's branches, casting scattered, dancing specks on the ground, like 1,000 tiny golden stars. In the afternoon, I received a text from Jenna. Just one line. Aloan, I've brought Mum back. She's staying with us tonight. I stared at the phrase brought Mum back for a long time. Strange how 4 words could remind me of a scene I had once seen in the emergency room, an elderly woman brought in as a wandering case. Later the nurse found a name tag on her with her home address, only 2 streets away from where she had been found. Sometimes the distance between wandering and being sent away is just a matter of wording. I replied with 1 word. Okay. Jenna sent another. She said she won't go back to yours. She said you don't need her anymore. I put my phone down. Martha was asleep on my lap, her drool soaking a patch of my trousers. I looked at her round little face and remembered my mother's words. You don't need her anymore, such a strange sentence, like a knife held the wrong way. Need. What does that word mean in the Bennett family? It meant I could be taken from, arranged, cleared out of a room, ordered to move. And once I stopped needing, I became the one in the wrong. In the evening, Maisie arrived. She stood at the door with 2 bags of takeaway, 1 sushi, 1 fried chicken, and a bottle of sparkling wine. I know you can't drink while nursing. I'll drink it for you. She kicked off her shoes as soon as she came in, ran barefoot into the living room, and when she saw Martha, she let out a muffled, baby-waking fearing squeal, then crouched beside the bouncer and stared for a full 2 minutes. She looks like you, Maisie said, but that chin is his. Don't mention him. Fine. She stood up, spread the takeaway boxes on the coffee table, and looked back at me. You look different today. Your eyes have changed, like the expression you get in the NICU after you've just saved a life. I opened the sushi box and stuffed a piece of salmon into my mouth. As I chewed, I felt the knot that had been twisting my stomach for 3 weeks start to loosen. I shut her mother out. Maisie twisted the cap off the sparkling wine, bubbles fizzing. I've been waiting for this day for 12 years. Don't exaggerate. I'm not. She took a sip, sat cross-legged on the sofa, and looked at me seriously. Aloan, do you remember the night of your pinning ceremony? You came back alone, sat on your dorm bed, and said they all went to Callum's rugby match. I wanted to drive over and set that entire Bennett pitch on fire. But you told me not to. You said, it's fine. I should be understanding. You've been understanding all along. So understanding that I'm exhausted just watching you." I looked down at the sushi in my hands. Grains of rice stuck to my fingertips, white, pearly. That was 12 years ago. After our father died, none of them came to my pinning ceremony. I had worn my crisp new uniform, pinned the silver nursing badge, stood in the third row of the hall, fully expecting that when I pushed open the auditorium doors, I would see them there. But only Maisie was there, sitting in the back row, holding up her phone to secretly film me walking on stage. She told me later she still had that video, and that she played it for me every time she thought I was about to break. Back then, I really believed that if I was capable enough, understanding enough, one day, I couldn't finish. "One day you get a seat at that table," Maisie picked up, her voice calm, as if stating a fact she had always known. "But you never once sat down. You were always the one standing between the kitchen and the dining room, passing the dishes." Martha fussed in the bouncer. I went over and lifted her, unclipping the carrier so she could lie against my chest. Her little mouth immediately started searching, nuzzling like a lost starfish. Maisie watched, and something wet flickered in her eyes. "I get it now," she said, her voice dropping. "My parents did the same with my brother. I was the older sister, so I had to yield, had to take care of him. But I ran to Leeds, 200 miles away from them. You didn't run. You bought a house and brought them in. I thought the house would change something." "The house only changed one thing," Maisie said. "It let them know you have a table. But they all want to sit at your table and eat, without ever thinking that you need to eat too." We talked until very late. Martha woke twice, fed twice, and had 3 nappy changes. Maisie was more skilled at burping than I was. She had done a pediatric rotation in university and had learned early how to use her little finger to coax a burp out. As she patted Martha's back, humming an off-key nursery rhyme, she suddenly said, "Did you name her Martha for real?" "What do you mean?" "In ancient languages, Martha means mistress, lady of the house. You know that, right?" I hadn't known. I had chosen the name simply because it sounded gentle, like a warm cup of hot chocolate. But when Maisie said that, I looked at the little girl nestled on her shoulder, eyes closed, lips slightly parted like a tiny pearl. "Mistress," I repeated. Suddenly, I felt the name was perfect. Maisie left around 11 that night. As she stood at the door putting on her shoes, she turned back. "Mrs. Hale is coming to paint the wall tomorrow, right?" I swapped shifts. "I'm off the day after. I'll come help with the baby." "Go buy the paint. Don't get that cheap children's stuff. Get the good kind. Your daughter deserves a beautiful wall." I closed the door and leaned against it for a while. The hallway was quiet, except for the sound of Martha's breathing from the bedroom monitor. 1, 2, 3, 4, a 2-second pause, 5, 6. I had grown numb to the counting. That 2-second pause no longer made my heart jump, because I knew she would breathe again. She would. I walked to the nursery doorway and, by the dim night light of the hall, looked at that half-scraped wall. The deep blue base was still there, and half the stars still glowed. My mother's scraper hadn't erased everything. Tomorrow, Mrs. Hale would come with her brushes, and we would restore the missing stars and paint the moon, the Milky Way, the crooked oak, with a little girl sitting in its branches, reaching up to pick a star. I wanted Martha to grow up knowing she had been raised under a complete, unbroken sky. I went back to the bedroom and lay down. Martha slept in the cot beside me, her chest rising and falling. As I closed my eyes, a picture flashed in my mind. My mother standing in the kitchen, telling me to pack, with a framed photo of my father on the windowsill behind her. I had chosen that photo. It was the only one from his belongings where he was smiling, because in most pictures he wasn't. I had placed it where my mother could see it every morning when she drank her first cup of tea. That frame was still on the windowsill. My mother had left without taking it yesterday afternoon. Tomorrow I would put it away in the top shelf of the storage cupboard. Not as revenge, just because it no longer belonged there. That spot, I decided, would hold a small plant that Martha could touch when she learned to walk, when she could reach out to its leaves. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Hale arrived at my door right on time. She carried a canvas bag stuffed with 6 tubes of paint, 3 brushes, a roll of masking tape, and a small palette knife. She stepped in, surveyed the scraped wall, and let out a long, from her nose. "It's salvageable," she announced. "The base color is intact. I'll mix a deep night blue to cover it and repaint the stars. But, Eloan, I want to add one more thing to this wall." She pointed to the center. "Right here, I'm going to paint a door." "A door?" "A door your daughter can push open, into another sky." Mrs. Hale pulled a brush from her bag, wet it, and swirled it on the palette. "When I was young, I painted a picture called Somewhere Beyond. It was a door set in midair. I burned it on the night of my divorce, and I've regretted it for 40 years. I owe myself that door. Let me make it up here." I watched her profile. At 70, her knuckles were slightly bent, her fingertips dotted with age spots, but her hand was as steady as a surgeon's. When she laid down the first stroke of paint, I suddenly felt that wall was no longer a wall. It was a beginning. At noon, after the first coat had dried, Mrs. Hale sat down to drink the tea I had brewed. Martha was feeding in my arms, her little face flushed and dewy, with a fine sheen of sweat. Mrs. Hale watched and smiled. "I had my daughter in March, too. She's 45 now, living in Canada. I haven't seen her in 3 years. Don't you miss her?" "I do. But she has her reasons for not coming back. A mother spends a lifetime doing what she thinks is right, only to find out in old age that all that right was just her own assumption. Your mother is the same. But don't soften now, Eloan. If you give an inch, your daughter will have to step back 10. At 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I watched the name pulse on the screen for 12 seconds, then swiped to answer. The line was very quiet enough that I could hear the hum of the current. When my mother's voice came through, it was a breathy whisper I had never heard before, as if she had a ball of cotton in her throat. "Eloan," she said, "I sat on your doorstep all night, and you didn't open the door. I thought all night, and I understood one thing. I waited." Martha turned in my arms, burying her face in the crook of my elbow. "After your father died, I was afraid of being alone. Callum had Jenna, he couldn't look after me. So I thought, you're capable, you have a house, you have a soft heart, so I held on to you. Too tightly." She paused for so long, I thought she had hung up. "Your house was never the family house. It was yours. I always knew it. I just couldn't admit it, because if I admitted it, I would have to face the fact that I had nothing of my own." My eyes suddenly burned. "Mum," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I don't hate you, but I can't give you what you want anymore. I gave too much before, and I emptied myself. Martha needs me to be full. I can't be an empty mother." A soft, almost inaudible gasp came from the other end. Then my mother said, "I'll have Jenna come pick up my things tomorrow. Just my clothes and that photo album. Your father's picture, keep it. You liked it more than I did." "All right. Eloan." "Yes. Is Martha doing well?" I looked down at the little girl in my arms. She had fallen asleep, a drop of milk still at the corner of her mouth like a tiny dewdrop. "She's doing very well. She's gained almost 2 pounds in 3 weeks. Her skin is fair, and her hair is brown, like yours when you were young." My mother let out a short laugh on the other end, so brief I wasn't certain I had actually heard it. "Like me, then," she said. "Good. That's good." The call ended. I stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, sunlight streaming through the window and falling on the little green plant I had bought yesterday and placed by the sink. Its leaves were fresh green, edges curling slightly, like a baby's fist. Mrs. Hale poked her head out from the nursery, her brush loaded with golden paint. "Eloan, come look. The first star is done." I walked over. In the center of the wall, on that deep blue field, a golden star the size of a palm was glowing, not just painted on, but built up by Mrs. Hale's palette knife in layered strokes, its edges textured like it was truly burning. "This one is for you," she said. "It's the biggest of all the stars. I'm calling it Martha's star. When your daughter is older and can't sleep at night, you can tell her there's a star in the sky that has her name." I stood with Martha in my arms in front of that star, and I felt something heavy settle in my chest, like a door that had been left wide open finally closing. Not slammed shut, but gently, securely, properly closed. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Martha let out a loud, resounding fart in my arms. Mrs. Hale burst out laughing, nearly dropping her brush. "This one," she said, wiping the tears from her eyes, "this one is going to be a handful." I laughed too, a laugh that rose from the very bottom of my chest, like a boiling kettle finally lifting its lid. Outside, the crooked oak swayed in the wind, its leaves rustling. Spring was near. Tiny green buds were starting to appear on the branches, small and plump, like countless promises waking up. I stood in my own kitchen, holding my own daughter, with a sky being reborn behind me. My mother was gone. My brother had come and gone. The walls were growing stars. And I, Eloan Bennett, 34, single mother, NICU nurse, finally felt that I could sit down. That seat at the table, the one where I had always passed the plates, I didn't need it anymore. I had a bigger table of my own. After dinner, Mrs. Hale went home, promising to return in the morning to paint the Milky Way. I put Martha in her little bath, warm water up to her belly, her legs kicking, her eyes wide with wonder, as if exploring a new world. I used a cotton ball to clean behind her ears, and I remembered the day our father died. It had been raining, and I stood in the hospital corridor calling Callum. He said, "It's raining, traffic is bad. I'll come tomorrow." After I hung up, I walked alone into my father's empty room and threw away the half-empty bottle of water on his bedside table. Back then I thought I was holding up for my father. Now I understand. I was holding up for the version of myself that still hoped to be needed. Martha splashed water all over my face. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I saw myself in the bathroom mirror. Tangled hair, fine lines at the corners of my eyes, prominent collarbones, and a wet patch on my pajama top from leaked milk. But my eyes held something bright, like the star Mrs. Hale had painted, with its fine, fractured light. I lifted Martha from the bath, wrapped her in a towel, and carried her to the windowsill. Outside, the street lamps of Hawthorne Lane had come on, their amber light falling on the crown of the crooked oak, making the new buds glow like tiny gems. Martha stared out, her little mouth open, letting out a soft, meaningless syllable. "That's a tree," I told her. "That's your tree. It was there when your mother bought this house 6 years ago." She didn't understand, but she listened. That night, I dreamt of my father for the second time. In the dream, he was younger than when he died, wearing his favorite dark green wool jumper, sitting on my front porch steps smoking a cigarette. I walked over and he said, "Eloan, did you know the oak in the back garden blooms in spring?" I didn't know oak trees bloomed. In the dream, I crouched beside him and asked, "Dad, why did you never come to see me at work?" He took a drag and let the smoke drift gray-blue under the streetlight. "Because I always thought you didn't need it. Look at you, you can do everything. You can carry anything." "I did need it," I said in the dream. "I always did." He nodded, stubbed out the cigarette on the step. "Now I know. Next time." I woke before dawn. Martha was sleeping quietly in her cot, her breathing steady. I turned over and looked at the silhouette of the oak tree outside the window, and I thought, maybe my father was right. Spring really was close. Maybe that old crooked oak would finally bloom this year. On Friday, Jenna came. She hadn't called ahead, just knocked. When I opened the door, she stood outside with one twin in her arms and the other in a buggy at her feet. She looked like she hadn't slept for 3 nights, dark circles down to her cheekbones, hair tied up with a pencil, cracked lips. Jenna was a small, thin woman. After giving birth to twins, she seemed to have been hollowed out, her clothes hanging loosely on her shoulders. "Eloan," she said, her voice still that soft, waterlogged cotton quality, "I'm here to pick up Mum's things." I stepped aside. She first put the boy in her arms into the buggy, then whispered to the one inside, "Miles, don't cry. Mummy will be 5 minutes." She took a key from her pocket, my spare key, the one my mother had kept, and handed it to me. "Mum asked me to return this." I took the key, its cold metal pressing into my palm. "You came alone? Where's Callum?" Jenna dropped her gaze. "He has work today." I said nothing. I led her upstairs and opened the door to my mother's bedroom. As it swung open, a stale mix of face powder and tea stains greeted me. The bed was made perfectly, the blanket folded into a square, a military fold my father had learned in the army, and my mother had kept up ever since. Two suitcases sat beside the wardrobe, one large, one small, both zipped shut. Jenna reached for the larger suitcase and her shoulder dipped. She was even weaker than she looked. I took it from her. "I'll carry it down. You watch the children." She blinked, her lips moving. "Alone, actually Go on." She stood in the middle of the room, twisting the hem of her shirt, looking like a schoolgirl sent to the principal's office. "Mom talked a lot last night. She said she's been unfair to you all her life. She said that on the day Dad died, she was standing in the hallway and heard you call Callum, and Callum said it was raining and he wouldn't come. And she didn't say a word." My grip on the suitcase handle tightened. "She said she's used to you all these years because she thought you could take it. She said you broke your arm when you were 5 and didn't cry, so she just assumed you could always take it until you shut her out that day and she realized you could hurt too." I stood there, the suitcase handle digging into my fingers. "Jenna, you know I never told you any of this." "I know." She lifted her head, and I saw the red-rimmed glisten in her eyes. "You never told anyone. Mum said you never told because you had to be the sensible one." I carried the suitcase downstairs and loaded it into the boot of Jenna's car. She pushed the double buggy out into the sunlight. The twin boys looked identical. Round eyes, flat noses, Callum's miniature copies. Jenna lifted one out and handed him to me. "Hold Miles. He's been saying auntie all morning." I took the warm, solid little body. Miles was 3 weeks old, born 10 days before. Martha, but a full pound heavier. He stared at me, blew a bubble, and then gave a reflexive muscle twitch smile that made my heart soften. "Jenna," I said, holding her son, looking at her face, "if you ever need help, you can bring them here. I'm off Thursdays, and Mrs. Hale is happy to lend a hand. Twins must be exhausting for the two of you." Jenna's tears fell instantly. She wiped them away quickly and nodded vigorously. "Eloan, the crying emoji I sent before, I wasn't speaking for Mum. I was just afraid you'd be angry and never speak to us again." "I won't stop speaking to you," I said. Miles squirmed in my arms, starting to fuss for a feed. I handed him back. "But boundaries need to be redrawn. Mum can't live here anymore. You're welcome to visit, but you need to give me a heads up. I can't just open the door anytime. Martha is tiny, I need a routine." Jenna nodded, so hard the pencil in her hair came loose. She pushed the buggy away down Hawthorne Lane, and just before she turned the corner, she looked back. That look reminded me of the day she married Callum 5 years ago, standing at the church door. She had looked back at me the same way. I had been her bridesmaid, and half the wedding budget had come from my pocket, but she had taken my hand that day and said, "Eloan, you're the kindest person in this family." And then she had cried. That was the first time someone had cried in response to my giving. I stood at my gate and watched Jenna's figure disappear around the corner. The crooked oak at the street corner had new shoots that were bigger than yesterday. Some had already unfurled into pointed little leaves, pale green, as tiny as a baby's fingernail. I went back inside. Martha had woken up and was loudly eyeing her bouncer, her legs kicking the blanket into a mess. I picked her up, changed her nappy, and went to the kitchen to make a bottle. Passing the nursery, I glanced in. Mrs. Hale hadn't come yet today, but the Martha star on the wall was still shining. The morning sun slanted in, striking the golden surface and casting fine, textured shadows from the palette knife strokes, like a real star, three-dimensional and alive. I remembered something Mrs. Hale had said while painting that star. "Eloan, have you heard that old legend that people turn into stars after death? I don't believe it. I think we're stars while we're alive. You, your daughter, me, that crooked tree next door, we're all stars. Some of us just have our light blocked by others." I stood with Martha in front of that wall, looking at the largest golden star. "Martha," I said to her, "you're going to shine. Mummy promises." She ed and blew a spray of drool in my face. I laughed. The sunlight grew brighter, pouring through the window and washing the entire wall in a pale gold. Mrs. Hale's knock came just as Martha was chewing on my finger with her toothless gums. I opened the door. Mrs. Hale had brought a whole box of paints and a small jar of gold glitter. "Today we paint the Milky Way," she announced, setting her canvas bag on the shoe rack with a commanding air of a general. "Eloan, bring the bouncer over. Let Martha watch us work. A girl needs to see the world from the start." I moved the bouncer to the nursery doorway so Martha faced the wall. She stared wide-eyed as Mrs. Hale's brush dragged a long, silvery white band across the deep blue base, the paint mixed with glitter that sparkled like crushed diamonds in the sun. I sat beside her, took her hand, and slowly lifted it. Her tiny fingers were semi-translucent in the light, pink and delicate, like little flower petals. "Martha," I said, "this is your sky. No matter when, you can always come back here. Mummy is right here." On the wall, the Milky Way was stretching out, curving past Martha's star, flowing slowly, gently, towards the far edge. Mrs. Hale hummed a song I had never heard, a tune that sounded old, as if it had drifted from some distant time. Outside, the oak shed another dead leaf. But beside the branch it fell from, 3 new leaves were pushing together, swaying lightly in the breeze. Spring had truly come. Mrs. Hale painted all afternoon. The Milky Way snaked down from the upper left, swept past Martha's star, and curved upward to the right, a river woven of silver and pale blue. Halfway through, she stopped for 2 cigarettes, in the back garden, facing the crooked oak, exhaling smoke that the wind carried away as she squinted, calculating where the next stroke should fall. Martha slept and woke and slept again. I left her in the living room bouncer and checked on her every few minutes. Each time she woke, she stared at the glow from the nursery at the end of the hall. That wall, lit by the afternoon sun, looked like a patch of night sky, even though it was clearly daytime. By the time Mrs. Hale packed up for the evening, the Milky Way was clearly taking shape. She said she would come back tomorrow to paint the small stars along its banks, dense as sand. As she cleaned her brushes, she gave me a glance. "Eloan, you're going back to work tomorrow, aren't you?" I blinked. "How did you know?" "You've been glancing at your phone schedule for 2 days. I've seen your thumb scrolling. Something's on your mind." She rinsed her brushes in water. "Go ahead. I'll watch Martha. Drop her off at my place in the morning, pick her up in the evening. That's how I raised my own daughter." My maternity leave was only 6 weeks. That was the most I could negotiate. The NICU was always short-staffed, and March brought a surge of premature births after flu season. The unit manager had called me twice, her tone gentle but the message clear. "Come back as soon as you can." I had wanted to take 12 weeks, but the bills were piling up on the kitchen table: mortgage, utilities, insurance, formula, and nappies for Martha. Each one reminding me that raising a child alone leaves no room for "I wish." On Saturday morning, I carried Martha to Mrs. Hale's door. She wore a yellow jumper today, her hair pinned back with clips, looking 5 years younger. "Put her down and leave, don't look back. If you look back, the baby will cry." I kissed Martha's forehead. She was wearing a pale blue sleepsuit and woolly socks I had found at a charity shop, washed 3 times to soften them. She gripped my finger, and I had to peel her little hand away 1 finger at a time. She pouted but didn't cry. "I'll come back at lunch to feed her," I said. "There are 4 bags of frozen milk in the fridge. Give her 1 at 12, 1 at 2. Eloan." Mrs. Hale put her hand on my shoulder. Her warmth came through her jumper, solid and real. "I've raised 1 child before. Go to work. If anything happens, I'll call you." I went. The corridors of Leeds General still carried that familiar smell, disinfectant mixed with a faint sweetness, the scent of formula and medical alcohol. When I changed into my uniform and walked into the NICU, all my senses snapped back. The beeping of monitors, the hiss of ventilators, the low hum of a backup incubator in the corner. That had been my background music for 12 years, not like home, but familiar as a second skin. Nurse Manager Jones stood behind the nurses' station and, seeing me, tilted her chin. "Bed 4, new admission, 28 weeks, female, 900 grams, respiratory distress syndrome, on non-invasive ventilation. Take her. I took the chart, scrubbed in, gloved up, and walked to bed 4. In the incubator lay a tiny, deep red body, skin as thin as translucent wax, with blue veins visible underneath. Her chest rose and fell with the ventilator, each breath accompanied by a thin, kitten-like whimper. I reached my hand through the port and gently touched her heel with my fingertip. She flinched, her heart rate spiking briefly before settling. "All right, little one," I said to her. "You are here." That was the first thing I said to every child in the NICU. Not "it's okay," not "don't be scared," but "you are here." Because I had seen too many children who didn't make it and their last moment was not here anymore. As long as you were still here, there was a chance. I adjusted the oxygen concentration, checked the umbilical venous catheter, and recorded the parameters. My hands moved on autopilot, but my mind was elsewhere. Martha at home, in Mrs. Hale's east-facing living room, lying in the bouncer, watching the ivy on the windowsill. Mrs. Hale would probably be humming that old tune while knitting. Thinking of her made my chest tighten, not a pain, but a warm squeeze, as if someone was gently holding my heart. But then I let go. She was safe. She was in a safe place. And I was here doing what I had done for 12 years, giving another 900-gram body a fighting chance. At lunch, I went to the break room to heat my food. Maisie was there on her day shift. She pushed her own sandwich towards me. "Eat this, I'll have your lunchbox." "What is that garbage?" "Radish soup." "You can't eat radish when you're nursing." "My mother said it helps with milk supply." "Your mother says a lot of things." "She also said the house was family property." I laughed, unscrewed my thermos, and took a sip. Maisie chewed on the rib from my soup, grease smeared across her lips. "How's Martha?" "Great." Yesterday, Mrs. Hale tried to teach her colors, waved a red ball in front of her eyes, and she followed it. "She can track at 6 weeks?" "Maybe not tracking," I said. "Maybe she just likes the color red." Maisie chewed for a moment, then suddenly stopped. "Eloan, have you ever thought about whether his side might come looking for you too later?" I closed the lid on my lunchbox. "He won't." "How can you be sure?" "When he left, he said it very clearly. I'm not cut out to be a father." Those were his exact words. A man who says that doesn't suddenly change his mind 6 months later. Maisie didn't press. She knew where that boundary lay. In the afternoon, bed 4's ventilator needed adjustment. I stood in front of the incubator, watching the oxygen saturation curve on the monitor, my fingertips hovering over the dial. That 900-gram girl, 24 hours earlier, she had been inside her mother. Now she lay in a plastic box, relying on machines to breathe. I had seen it so many times. It always felt like a tug-of-war between everything medicine could do and the little body's own will to live. Most of the time, the will won, but as a nurse, you can't bet on most of the time. You have to treat every breath as if it's the last. At 5:30, I handed over. I took off my gloves, washed my hands, changed back into my clothes, and walked out of the hospital. Early March evenings in Leeds were still cold, wind gusting from the street corners, and I pulled my coat tighter as I headed to the bus stop. My phone buzzed, a photo from Mrs. Hale. Martha was lying on Mrs. Hale's sofa, with the orange tabby cat beside her, reaching out a paw to touch her foot. Martha kicked, the cat drew back, then reached again. The photo was blurry, but I could see Martha's smile, that wide-mouthed, crescent-eyed baby grin. I stood under the bus shelter looking at that photo for a long time. The wind blew my hair across my face, and I sniffed. I wasn't going to cry. I just suddenly realized that I wasn't completely alone in this world. I had a daughter. I had a 70-year-old neighbor who would paint me stars, and I had someone who would send me photos while I was at work. The bus arrived. I got on, sat by the window, and watched the streetlights come on one by one. The twilight over the city was gray-blue, like the base color Mrs. Hale had mixed. By the time I got home, it was fully dark. I went to Mrs. Hale's to pick up Martha. She was asleep, wrapped in a yellow blanket, as snug as a little potato. Mrs. Hale handed her over, blanket and all. Milk drunk, nappy changed, she woke once, I held her and sang for 10 minutes and she went back down. Aloan, your daughter is not shy. That's a good quality. I carried Martha home. Hawthorne Lane had wide gaps between the streetlights. One stretch was completely dark, lit only by the glowing windows of distant houses. The crooked oak stood in the darkness like a silent sentinel. As I passed it, I reached out and touched its trunk. The rough bark still held a little warmth from the day's sun, cool against my palm. Once inside, I turned on the living room light, laid Martha in her cot, took off my coat, and went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of hot water. While the kettle boiled, I leaned against the counter and stared out at the small back garden. The grass hadn't grown back yet. Mrs. Hale had raked last autumn's leaves into a pile, still waiting to be cleared. But I noticed, near the fence, a clump of tender green shoots pushing up. Not grass, but something straighter, perhaps flower seeds Mrs. Hale had scattered last year. I didn't know their name, but they were growing. On Sunday, I didn't have work. Mrs. Hale came as usual to finish the Milky Way, and I watched with Martha in my arms. The galaxy now covered most of the wall, stars thick as dust, some as large as a fingernail, some no bigger than a brush point, silvery white, pale gold, light blue, all mingling in a shimmering river. Today Mrs. Hale started painting the riverbanks, using a faint violet to outline the edges, calling it Nebula. "When you go back to work the day after tomorrow, I'll watch her," Mrs. Hale said as she painted. "Thursday I'm off. Friday and Saturday, I have day shifts. Sunday." "Don't give me your schedule," she interrupted. "Just tell me the day before. I'm not going anywhere." Martha made a sound in my arms and reached a hand towards the wall, a reflex, a neurological exploration, not a conscious gesture. Still, I stepped closer, letting her fingertips touch the painted surface. The moment they made contact, Mrs. Hale said, "Oh, she's got glitter on her fingers." I looked down. Sure enough, a few flecks of gold dust clung to Martha's tiny fingertips, twinkling in the light. "Tomorrow I'll make a little handprint for her," Mrs. Hale said, "in the blank space at the corner. Every year she grows, we'll add another print. When she's older, she can look at this wall and see her own hands growing." That image unfolded in my mind. Martha's handprint at 3, at 5, at 7, a row of tiny palm prints set against the stars. I didn't know if I would live in this house forever, but in that moment I hoped I would. I wanted her to learn to walk in front of this wall, to learn to talk, to learn to reach for what she wanted. On Monday afternoon, Jenna came again. This time she was alone, pushing the double buggy, one boy asleep, the other awake and staring at the clouds. She knocked and stopped at the door, as if she had learned from last time to wait. "Eloan, I baked a cake," she said, holding out a tin box with a greasy stain seeping around the lid. "Banana walnut. Martha isn't on solids yet, it's for you." I took the box and inhaled real banana, mixed with the toasty scent of walnuts. "How did you find time to bake with 2 babies? Callum watched them last night." She lowered her eyes. "He knew I was coming to see you and told me to bring something. He's not working overtime today? He's taken annual leave. 2 weeks, starting next week." Jenna's fingers twisted around the buggy handle. "He said he wants to come see Martha, but he said he needs your permission first. He's too afraid to ask you directly." I stood in the doorway. The wind lifted the lid of the tin, releasing the warm, moist fragrance of fresh cake. "He doesn't need my permission," I said. "Martha is his niece. He can come any time, just call first." Jenna nodded rapidly, like a little bird pecking. "Then, can he come tomorrow afternoon? He said he wants to bring Miles and Noah along so the boys can meet their cousin." "Tomorrow afternoon is fine. But no more than 2 hours. Martha gets colicky in the afternoon. If she gets upset, everyone will suffer." Jenna nodded again. As she turned the buggy, I noticed she had gained a little weight since last week. Her cheeks had some color. Maybe because my mother moving back in with them had meant someone else shared the household load. I wasn't sure if that sharing was good or bad, but Jenna looked better, and that was enough. Tuesday afternoon, Callum came. This time he wasn't in his work jacket. He wore a clean dark blue jumper, his hair combed, his chin freshly shaved. He pushed the double buggy with Miles and Noah inside, each wearing matching beanies, one blue, one yellow. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at me with the awkwardness of a first-time job applicant. "Eloan," he said, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard for years, a deliberate show of vulnerability, not the passive kind that waited for me to forgive, but a kind where he came forward with open hands. "I brought you flowers." From the basket under the buggy, he pulled out a bunch of white daisies, wrapped in brown paper, stems still beaded with water. It was the second time in his life he had bought me flowers. The first was for my 18th birthday. He had saved £3 from his allowance to buy me a single rose, then was dragged away by our father to play rugby. I took the flowers and my fingers brushed his. His hand was still warm, his palm calloused, a builder's hand. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Martha just woke up. He maneuvered the buggy inside carefully, parking it in the hallway so it wouldn't block the way. Then he stood in the middle of the living room, watching me lift Martha from her cot. She had just woken, her hair sticking up, a ring of milk around her lips, and she looked at Callum with a sleepy, unfocused gaze before yawning. Callum stood still, hands hanging at his sides as if he didn't know where to put them. She looks like you. Everyone says her chin is like Grandma's." He took 2 steps closer, extended one finger, and gently touched the back of Martha's hand. She latched onto it with that newborn grip, a reflex but tight, turning his knuckle white. He gasped, not in pain, but in surprise, as if something warm had struck him. "She's got a strong grip," he said. "Newborns do. Once they grab on, they don't let go." Callum looked down at his finger, still held captive. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Eloan," he said, his voice dropping. "I cried in the car that day. You saw, didn't you?" "Yes. I cried because I couldn't say anything. You said she needs to be walked for 3 hours with colic, and that's when I realized how hard it is to take care of a baby. Jenna walks miles for 3 hours every night because Noah's crying wakes him up. She never told me she walks 3 hours." I held Martha and looked at him. The light from the window fell on the thinning crown of his head. He was 33, but looked 40. "From now on, hold your sons more often," I said. "Not 3 hours, even 10 minutes. Jenna needs you to see her." He gently pulled his finger from Martha's grip. She scowled immediately, so I rocked her, and she let go. Callum wiped his finger on his trousers and turned to look at his sons in the buggy. "Miles looks like Jenna," he said, crouching beside the buggy and touching the one in the yellow beanie, the one who was asleep. "Noah looks like me, look at that eye distance." I carried Martha over and bent down to look at the 2 boys. They really were different, one soft-featured, one sharp-edged. Twins could look like 2 entirely different species. But both were handsome. Both had the Bennett light brown hair and round eyes. "Bring them over to play with, Martha," I said. "If they grow up together, they'll be close." Callum looked up at me, and his round eyes were wet again. He blinked hard, forcing the moisture back. "Eloan," he said in a dry, strained voice, "I didn't know before how hard it is for you alone. Now you know." He stood up, facing me. Between us were Martha's yawn and 2 boys dozing on and off in the buggy. He said, "I'm off on Wednesday. I'll come over and fix the fence in the back garden." I saw a section leaning. "Okay. And that sunken porch, I have a level in the car. I can level it out today." "Not today," I said, my voice steady. "Today you get to know your niece. You can fix the fence next time. You have a whole lifetime to mend things." Callum smiled. The smile spread slowly across his round face, like ripples from a stone thrown into water. He reached out again, this time hesitantly, and touched the tuft of light brown fluff on Martha's head. She didn't pull away. She even tilted her head towards his palm. I stood in the living room with my daughter in my arms, my brother crouched on the floor watching his twin sons, and outside the window, a new layer of leaves had unfurled on the crooked oak. Sunlight streamed in, falling on the floor, on the daisies, on the blue canopy of the buggy. The air smelled of milk, of the daisy's green scent, and of the faint turpentine residue left from Mrs. Hale's painting. When Callum left that evening, he almost walked off with only Noah, forgetting Miles in the hallway. He pushed the single buggy 3 steps before turning back, his face flushed. I handed Miles over, laughing, and said, "You're still a rookie father." As he took his son, he bent down and kissed Miles's forehead, so gently, as if afraid of breaking a small dream. After they were gone, I put the daisies in a glass jar and placed them on the kitchen windowsill where my father's photograph used to be. The daisies were just opening, white petals around a yellow center, like tiny stars. That night, after Martha was asleep, I sat on the living room floor with my back against the sofa, looking at the glow coming from the nursery. Mrs. Hale had finished the Milky Way today. She had added, at the far right, an orange-red star, squashed and flattened, as if worn down by life. She said it was an old star, worn down but still glowing. I suspected she had painted herself into it. My mother's name appeared on my phone screen once that week. A text, just 3 words. "Martha okay?" Time stamped 2:17 a.m. I saw it the next morning and replied with a photo, a candid shot of Martha yawning on Mrs. Hale's shoulder, her face round, her hair a mess. My mother replied with a thumbs up. And that was all. I didn't know if there would be more between us. Maybe that was enough, a late-night text, an emoji, the occasional glint of a worn-down star. But I didn't feel empty. It felt just right. I used to need her full love to know I existed. Now I knew I existed anyway. On Thursday, I had the day off, and Mrs. Hale didn't come to paint. The wall was done. She sat in my back garden in the morning, sipping tea, with Martha in the bouncer beside her, and the orange tabby cat curled under the bouncer, its tail occasionally brushing Martha's feet. I was crouched in the garden, pulling up weeds, digging out last year's dead mint roots to replant fresh ones. "Eloan," Mrs. Hale said between sips, "have you been dreaming lately?" I dreamed of my father once. What did he say? He said oak trees bloom. I've never seen an oak tree bloom. Mrs. Hale set down her cup and looked at me. I've lived 70 years, and I've never seen an oak bloom either. But not blooming before doesn't mean they won't. Some trees take a very long time to be ready. Maybe your father meant that. I crouched in the dirt, clutching a handful of wet roots, mud under my fingernails. The spring sun was warm on the back of my neck, like a hand that wasn't in a hurry to move. Martha stirred in the bouncer, starting to babble in her own language. Mrs. Hale looked down at her and moved the cat's tail off the bouncer rail. "This one's going to be a tough cookie," Mrs. Hale said. I can tell by her eyes. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my hands. The crooked oak stood by the fence, its branches now mostly covered with green leaves, swaying gently, slowly in the breeze. I looked at it for a long time, until Martha started fussing impatiently before I finally looked away. Maybe this year, it really would bloom. Maybe next year. Maybe the year after. But I could wait. I carried Martha back inside, and as we passed the star-filled wall, her hand reached out again. This time I let her touch the orange-red old star. The glitter from her fingertips was still there, and it picked up a smear of orange. "You've touched Mrs. Hale's star," I told her. "She's here." Martha's face split into a wide, crescent-eyed grin, just like the one in my phone photo. The daisies on the windowsill were at their fullest. I stood in my own kitchen, holding my daughter, bathed in the light of my own stars, and I suddenly felt that at 34, life was just beginning. Not too late. Not late at all.